Have you ever, looked at a simple board game, maybe just a couple of carved pieces of wood sitting on a cardboard square, and tried to imagine it as a literal blueprint for global warfare?
I mean, that requires a pretty profound shift in how you view the world around you,
Yeah, total.
Because you take this rainy day pastime, something entirely domestic, and suddenly you're looking at a microscopic, highly ordered simulation of conquest and survival.
It's wild, and well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore a truly remarkable piece of literature that basically forces us into that exact shift in perspective.
Right.
We are unpacking the poem New Chess Game by Weerathunga W. Nimal. And the goal here is to understand how this poem takes the classic, rigid framework of chess and transforms it into a devastating metaphor for geopolitical conflict.
Yeah, colonization, the bitter struggle between local identity and external imperialistic powers. It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. But before we get too deep into the trajectory of this piece, we should probably set some ground rules.
Definitely. It is crucial to establish the parameters of our discussion first. The themes Weerathunga W tackles, imperial overreach, resource extraction, asymmetric warfare. These carry heavy political weight in the real world.
Oh, absolutely.
So to be clear to you, the listener, our objective today is not to take a side. We aren't here to endorse a specific ideology or weigh in on contemporary political disputes.
Yeah, not at all.
We are stepping into this text strictly as impartial guides. Our focus is just to analyze the intricate geopolitical framework the poet has constructed and to understand the specific viewpoints presented within the boundaries of the poem itself.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning, because the opening imagery Weerathunga W. Nimal uses doesn't feel, geopolitical at all.
No, it's very quiet.
Right, it feels incredibly grounded. The narrator describes sitting quietly on a floor mat. They aren't playing on some luxurious carved mahogany board in a fancy parlor.
Right, it's just a simple piece of white cloth.
Exactly. And they have personally drawn and colored the 64 black and white squares. There are 32 pieces in total, and the narrator is playing the black pieces.
Which is a very deliberate detail.
Yeah, it feels entirely localized, almost like a DIY community event that exists purely for its own sake. It's like a friendly, intimate neighborhood game of pickup basketball.
I like that analogy. The intimacy of that setup is actually doing a lot of structural work for the poem.
How so?
Well, it establishes a baseline of self-sufficiency. The local players are mastering their own environment. They created the board, they understand the boundaries they've drawn on that cloth, and crucially, they're thriving within them.
I want to pause on that idea of thriving, actually, because there is a very specific detail here. The poem explicitly notes that the local players were, quote, always winning.
Yes, always winning.
Which, on the surface, if I'm playing a game in my living room and I'm always winning, it doesn't matter to anyone outside that room.
Right, nobody cares.
But in the poem, this localized success triggers a massive disruption. A distant observer takes notice, and things change immediately. Suddenly, it's like that casual pickup basketball game gets hijacked by a corporate professional team.
What's fascinating here is how that disruption acts as the catalyst for the entire metaphorical conflict.
Yeah.
We have to look at the psychology of imperial expansion. Competence and independence in a local population are, historically, rarely ignored by external entities.
Because it's a threat.
Or a resource.
Huh.
If a local group is always winning, meaning they're successfully managing their own resources, governing their own space, and thriving without outside intervention, that independence becomes an affront to an imperial mindset.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, unregulated local success is viewed by the external power as a missed opportunity for extraction or, control.
So the outsider intervenes, and they don't just ask to join the next game on the floor mat.
No, they take over.
Yeah. The poem describes how this distant figure ties the white pieces to a big man's hand and brings them in specifically to ensure the locals are defeated. And the hand is physically attached to the pieces.
That imagery is so striking. The big man wielding the white pieces operates as a proxy. He represents this overarching force intervening from afar to enforce dominance over the local black pieces.
Right.
They aren't arriving to participate in the local culture or to play by the rules established on that white cloth. They are arriving to subjugate.
And the tying of the pieces, what does that represent?
The fact that the pieces are tied to the hand suggests a really rigid, mechanized control. The white pieces have no autonomy. They're literally just instruments of a distant will.
That brings up a fascinating mechanism of how power operates, because they don't just bring in a bigger player, they completely shatter the technological reality of the game.
They really do.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the poem shifts from this hand-drawn cloth to an absolute barrage of technological supremacy.
The contrast is jarring.
It is. The external forces start using radio, satellites, and web messages to coordinate their moves.
Consider the vast disparity in resources being highlighted here.
Yeah.
You, the listener, can likely picture the contrast. On one side, you have local players sitting on a floor mat, looking at squares they drew with their own hands.
Just a piece of cloth.
Right. And on the other side, the opponent is utilizing the orbital high ground. They are coordinating via satellite.
It's like bringing a drone strike to a knife fight. I am struggling to understand how the locals are even supposed to engage with that.
They aren't supposed to. That's the point.
Because the external forces use this technological high ground to deliver a highly rigid instruction: white to play and win. And I have to push back on the premise here.
Go ahead.
If you sit down across from me, and before anyone touches a piece, you announce a mandated outcome where you are guaranteed to win, we are no longer playing a game.
Exactly. That is the precise realization the poem wants you to have. It ceases to be a game the moment the white pieces arrive.
It's just a performance.
Yes, if we examine how systemic oppression functions historically, the rules are often merely an illusion of fairness. They are a performance of diplomacy.
Because the result is already decided.
Right. The instruction, white to play and win, implies that the outcome is predetermined by the architecture of power. The colonizing force will go through the motions of the game, but the conclusion has already been written into the law.
And their version of the law is incredibly fluid when it suits them. I mean, the invaders bring in actual weapons to castle.
Bringing literal weapons to a board game.
Yeah, and they refuse to let the local player capture or cut any of their pieces. And then they do something entirely surreal. The poem states that the external force cheats by expanding the 64 squares to infinity.
The mechanism of changing the rules is the most potent weapon they have.
Let me try to visualize this. It feels like sitting down to play Monopoly and you are playing by the rules, buying properties, rolling the dice.
Okay, I'm with you.
But halfway through, the bank realizes they are losing. So instead of rolling the dice, the bank suddenly declares eminent domain over the physical chair you were sitting on.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
They tell you the rules now mandate their victory, and if you complain, they simply rewrite the instruction manual in real time to state that they own the concept of sitting down.
That analogy perfectly captures the absurdity and really the violence of the situation. When the poem says they expand the board to infinity, it is illustrating how imperial powers refuse to recognize sovereign borders or established limits.
They just keep pushing.
Exactly. When the established rules of engagement, the literal 64 squares of the board, become inconvenient for the oppressor, they do not forfeit. They rewrite the physics of the conflict entirely.
How does that translate to the real world, though? Because, you can't literally make a chessboard infinite.
You see it in the manipulation of international law or territorial claims. Think about how modern or how historical empires would arbitrarily draw lines on a map to claim jurisdiction over land they had never even seen. By expanding the board to infinity, the external power extends the boundaries of their jurisdiction endlessly to ensure they can never legally or technically lose.
They just swallow everything up.
Yes, they are monopolizing the very fabric of reality that the conflict takes place on.
So what does this all mean for the people actually sitting on that floor mat? Because the poem doesn't let us just stay in the abstract realm of chess theory forever.
No, it brings it back to earth very quickly.
It grounds the metaphor in incredibly harsh realities, and the emotional shift in the text is jarring. As defeat sets in, the locals aren't just losing carved pieces of wood, they were physically driven out of their tent.
The poet forces us to look at the tangible stakes of this forced match. The abstract strategy suddenly has a very real physical cost.
And while the locals are being displaced from their tent, the victors are busy making new laws and boasting about their success. Then Weerathunga W does something that really caught my attention.
What's that?
He drops the chess metaphor completely. The ultimate cost of this gamble isn't described as a checkmate or a loss of points. The text reveals that what is actually being lost is the mortgaging of oil fields, rivers, and mountain ranges.
Right. Why do you think the poet chooses to abandon the metaphor at that specific moment?
Well, I think because if he kept calling them pawns and knights, it might soften the blow. Calling an oil field a rook makes it a game piece. Calling it an oil field forces the listener to confront the reality of the theft.
Exactly.
Being chased from the tent isn't a chess move. It is the erasure of a humble home of local identity.
It is a striking literary technique. The tent is a powerful symbol of local indigenous sovereignty. It is a structure that belongs to the earth, lived in by people who truly understand the land.
And it just gets wiped out.
Yes, it is simply bulldozed by the arbitrary laws created by the victors. Victors who, remember, are sitting far away coordinating via satellite. They create legislation to legitimize their displacement of the local population.
It is the ultimate legal loophole. You steal the land, and then you write a law saying the land was yours all along.
And when the poem explicitly mentions the oil fields, rivers, mountain ranges, the mask falls away entirely. The poet is looking directly at the audience, telling you not to get lost in the cleverness of the board game analogy.
Look at what's actually happening.
Right. Look at what is actually being extracted. The true prize was never victory on a cloth mat. The prize is massive resource extraction and the physical, geographic takeover of the land. The white pieces are playing for absolute consumption.
If the text stopped there, it would be a brilliant, albeit bleak, account of exploitation. But the narrative refuses to end in defeat.
It does take a turn.
The local players refuse to be subjugated without a daily fight. The poem reaches a critical turning point where the oppressed must adapt to survive, and the narrator's side adopts what the poet specifically names the Sicilian defense.
That is an incredibly deliberate and loaded choice of terminology by the author. To fully grasp the weight of this turning point, we actually have to dive into the mechanics of chess theory for a second.
Walk me through it, because I know the Sicilian defense is famous, but how does it function mechanically on the board?
Okay, so in a standard game of chess, white always moves first. Traditionally, white's opening move is to push their king's pawn forward to a square called e4.
Right.
This immediately stakes a claim on the very center of the board. Now, a conventional symmetrical response from black would be to mirror that move, pushing their own pawn forward to meet white in the center.
Meeting force with identical force.
Precisely. But the problem is, because white moved first, white will always have a slight tempo advantage in a symmetrical game.
Because they're always one step ahead.
Exactly. If you just copy what the powerful opponent does, their initial advantage will eventually crush you. The Sicilian defense entirely rejects that symmetry.
So what does black do instead?
Instead of mirroring white in the center, black pushes a pawn on the flank to a square called c5. It creates an immediate, severe imbalance on the board from the very first move.
Oh, interesting.
Black essentially says, I will not fight you head-on where you are strongest. I am going to attack your center from the side, creating complex, asymmetrical positions where your traditional advantages might actually become liabilities.
That is a perfect, literal chess metaphor for guerrilla warfare.
It really is.
You refuse to meet the occupying force in a pitched, symmetrical battle on an open field because you know they have the satellites and the infinite resources. You change the geometry of the conflict.
This raises an important question, and the physical shift described in the poem really reinforces your point about guerrilla tactics. The text says the local players are forced to physically hide under mountains and at the bottom of the sea.
They just disappear.
They take the fight off the traditional board entirely.
Which makes sense. If the oppressor has expanded the board to infinity and holds the high ground in orbit, you literally cannot fight them on the surface.
You have to go underground. You use the very mountains and rivers they are trying to steal as your armor. And the poem adds another layer of complexity here. It notes that the local players are playing bare.
Bare. Like, without pieces.
They are completely without their major pieces. They have no queens and no rooks.
I'm trying to map those specific pieces onto our geopolitical framework here. If the board is the country and the squares are the borders, what are the queens and rooks?
Well, in chess, queens and rooks are the heavy artillery. They can sweep across the entire board in a single move. In the context of global conflict, they represent heavy military machinery.
Like tanks and jets.
Exactly. Vast established wealth, sophisticated infrastructure, massive conventional armies. The locals have been stripped of all of that. They're operating with almost nothing.
But they turn that lack of conventional resources into a tactical advantage by relying on stealth, adaptation, and an absolute underdog mentality, they become entirely unpredictable.
Yes.
They aren't burdened by the traditional structures of power that the white pieces rely on to even make sense of the board.
It is the realization that playing a conventional game against an opponent who dictates the rules is a death sentence. The local players stop playing the opponent's game even while the opponent blindly assumes the match is still proceeding normally.
Which brings us to the climax of the poem, and the imagery here is astonishing. It is the ultimate checkmate, the culmination of this grueling Sicilian defense. The text mentions them passing Karpov.
Anatoly Karpov. For listeners who might not follow historical chess rankings, Karpov was a legendary Soviet chess grandmaster.
The heavy hitter.
He was a world champion who embodied the ultimate institutional chess elite. He was backed by the full weight of a state-sponsored machine dedicated to board supremacy.
So, by stating that they are passing Karpov, the poet is saying something profound about institutional power.
Passing Karpov symbolizes that the local indigenous resistance has surpassed the very architects of the system. They haven't just beaten a player.
They beat the system itself.
They have outthought the grandmasters of imperialism. They have transcended the formalized, state-sponsored dominance that Karpov represents.
And the way they achieve this victory is crucial. The poem explicitly states that the narrator's side completely rejects the traditional pieces. They reject the bishops, the rooks, the knights. Why do they have to abandon these pieces to win?
Because you cannot use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. To achieve genuine liberation, the local players had to reject the opponent's hierarchical, traditional rules of engagement entirely.
That makes sense.
Think about what those pieces represent. The bishop, moving diagonally, often represents religious or ideological institutions. The knight represents the aristocratic cavalry. The rook represents the fortress, the military installation.
The pillars of the empire.
These are all hierarchies of the colonizing force. The black pieces win by refusing to value the structures the white pieces rely on.
They deconstruct the entire value system of the board. And finally, against all odds, the white king is left in checkmate. The final visual Weerathunga W leaves us with is the white king turned to stone.
The cognitive dissonance of the colonizer, rendered physically.
It feels almost mythological, like looking at Medusa. From a passive group of locals on a floor mat getting steamrolled by a big man to this moment of total paralyzing victory. But, why stone? Why doesn't the king just fall over or surrender?
Turning to stone represents the absolute paralyzing shock of the imperial power. Imagine the mindset of the colonizer here.
Okay.
They relied on satellites, infinite boards, predetermined rules, and overwhelming technological superiority. They believed their victory was a law of physics.
Inevitable.
Right. When they are suddenly confronted by their own defeat, they are petrified. They literally cannot comprehend a universe where they are bested by the very people they had so profoundly underestimated and exploited.
Their brains just short-circuit.
Their worldview is shattered so completely that they freeze into monuments of their own hubris.
It is a breathtaking conclusion. When you step back and look at the whole journey of this text, New Chess Game isn't just a clever poem about moving little carved pieces around.
Not at all.
It is an incredibly dense encapsulation of how power, technology, and resources actually dictate global conflicts. It highlights the immense asymmetrical resilience required to fight back and win against a force that controls the very rules of reality.
It demands that the reader recognize the hidden mechanics of oppression and, frankly, the immense strategic courage it takes to subvert them.
So why does unpacking a poem like this matter to you, the listener? Because analyzing literature like this fundamentally trains your brain to look past the surface level of the information you consume every day.
It really does sharpen your critical lens.
And the next time you are watching the evening news or scrolling through your feed and you see a global conflict casually described by a pundit as a political chess match, you will know to stop and ask what the real stakes are.
You won't just see the politicians moving the pieces on the board anymore.
Exactly. Sorry. I mean, that builds on the entire point of the metaphor dropping, you'll ask. Where are the real-world oil fields? Where are the rivers being diverted?
How is the board being legally expanded?
Yes. How is it being expanded to infinity? And most importantly, where are the displaced people, the ones forced out of their tents, currently hiding under the mountains, preparing their own Sicilian defense?
Analyzing this poem ensures you never look at the game the same way again. And as we conclude our deep dive into Weerathunga W.'s work, I want to leave you with a final lingering question to ponder.
Ooh, all right.
The black pieces achieve this miraculous victory, by completely abandoning the traditional pieces and the established rules of the system. They had to step outside the game to beat the game.
Which leaves a massive vacuum once the game is over.
Precisely. So what happens the day after checkmate? When the white king is stoned and the oppressor is paralyzed, what do the victors do?
Right, what's next?
Do they rebuild the board, set up the very same hierarchies, and try to play a fair game this time? Or do they burn the chess set forever, ensuring that this terrible game can never ever be played against them again?